Just in case you've never heard of them before, Disney's Twisted Tales take an animated Disney film and say, what if blank? So in this case, they took Hercules and said, what if Meg had to become a Greek false god? Now the obvious issue you might take with that is they made Megara the main character of this book instead of Hercules. That was a decision that I was initially upset by, but at some point I was convinced that Megara had enough to build her own story around. After all, she is one of the fan favorite characters from the movie. So thank goodness this is not as bad as half, maybe more, of the Twisted Tales. This one's written by Jen Colonita and not Liz Broswell. In this book, there's toxic mentalities introduced early on that you sort of could expect to be portrayed as the right mentalities, but as the book goes on, you see that it actually is aware that there's some growth that Megara needs to be doing. At first, she thinks that she needs to do everything herself to the point of being mad at people who try to help her, but the book is aware of how bad that is, and in the book acts accordingly. Ultimately, it did kind of feel like it was resolving unfinished business with Megara's character, and that stuff about Megara's backstory. In the film, Hades was talking about Megara selling her soul to Hades in order to save the life of her boyfriend, only for the boyfriend to run off with someone else. I actually kind of don't like how the movie almost portrayed Hercules as the very, very rare exception to the rule of men being horrible. This book delves into that past a lot and expands on things, so it's not as simple as we thought it was, or it was before. I mean, as simple as the movie had it, if that makes sense. There were a few things that I found not really infuriating, just kind of disappointing, but I could see other people feeling differently about it. For one thing, there's something that gets revealed about Hades in this book that kind of, I hesitate to say that it puts him in a sympathetic light as much as it sort of has a different side to him that's not all bad. And personally, I didn't really go for that very much. But I'm thinking there's probably a lot of people that have the taste for that kind of thing. So I'm not really counting it as a strike against the book. The other thing is, I kind of feel like this book goes in directions that are the road most traveled with these stories based off of a Greek mythology. And that might be something that some people do like, because they like seeing that story however many times. Now, Hercules does show up a few times. He's not very present in this book, but when he does show up, he is as good-hearted as you would expect him to be. It's not like they ripped apart his character to make Megara look better, thankfully. And another thing this book does to address a kind of a problem with the movie, well, an unaddressed, unresolved thing about the movie is I always thought it was messed up how Zeus would not let Hercules return to Olympus unless he was immortal. And this book is like, yeah, it is kind of messed up. Let's play around with Zeus being messed up just a tiny bit. It's only brought up in a few of the chapters, but it does scratch that itch of Zeus was kind of being a jerk in the movie, if you think about it. To set the expectations accurately, I want to clarify how I felt about the overall quality of this book. I liked it. I didn't love it. I like Hercules. It's not one of my favorites, but if Hercules is one of your favorite Disney movies, you might theoretically enjoy this more than I did, unless you're super, super disappointed by Hercules not being very present in it. But if you're a huge, huge Megara fan, that is a reason for you to read this book and would probably like it more than I did. And yes, if you like that path most traveled that pops up in these Greek mythology books, then you might enjoy it more than I did. The next Twisted Tale I'm reading is a little bit different. A Twisted Tale Anthology. I think it's a little bit confusing how they call the book an anthology, which is filled with anthologies. What it's trying to say is there's multiple shorter stories in this. And they're written by 8 different authors. If they were all written by Liz Broswell, we'd be in trouble, but it's 8 different authors. Unfortunately, Liz Broswell is among the list of those 8 authors, but she's not writing all of them. If you haven't watched my other videos about Twisted Tales, everything Liz Broswell writes is pain. Some of these authors have written other Twisted Tales before, but we have a few new names here. The returning authors are Elizabeth Lim, Liz Broswell, Jen Colonnita, and Farah Rashan. The newcomers to Twisted Tales are Livia Blackburn, M.K. England, Nicole Ostow, I probably pronounced that wrong, but continuing, and Christina Perez. Now, full disclosure, I know very little about those authors apart from what I'm going to be reading in this book. Time of recording, I have only read the first of these 16 Twisted Tales. The first one being Cast Out, What If Snow White Learned Magic by Olivia Blackburn. When you hear the words, what if Snow White learned magic, you might be imagining something a lot more epic than what actually happens. I mean, you might be imagining Snow White learning an onslaught of powerful spells that lets her go toe-to-toe with however many wizards. But really this is, what if a beginner learned a few spells that barely managed to get her to jerry-rig her way to victory. So don't expect epic battles of explosive proportions. But there is something to be said for Snow White's underdog status and having her just barely survive. Now, elephant in the room, the prince does not show up in this story, and that can come across as trying to remove the man from the equation, but you can be forgiving and say that this story just didn't have time to flesh out that relationship. Cast Out was only 37 pages long. The dwarves are barely in this, they just get glossed over really quickly. And this book wanted Snow White to be more active in the story, but it's good that it didn't shun her feminine characteristics. There's been too many times where writers think that writing a strong female character means she can't do anything commonly seen as feminine. Ultimately, Cast Out was just kind of okay. So the ultimate question, I've only read one of these 16 stories. Hypothetically, if I knew that the other 15 stories in this book were of the exact same quality as the first, would I recommend the book? Not really. It's hard to ask someone to commit to 16 stories of just okay. However, if you do end up buying this, I wouldn't really tell you to skip the first one, if that makes sense. But we all know which Disney book you really want to know about. That's Prince of Thorns and Nightmares. This and the Twisted Tale Anthology released on the same day, and I really wanted to read this book. However, I really knew that reading the Twisted Tale Anthologies could get me multiple videos, so I'll be bouncing between reading one of the Twisted Tale stories and then some of Prince of Thorns and Nightmares. And since I'll be making individual videos about the stories in the Twisted Tale Anthology, I'll be giving you updates on my impressions of Prince of Thorns and Nightmares. You might remember that I loved Prince of Song and Sea, which is by the same author. Prince of Song and Sea was Little Mermaid from Eric's perspective, and this is Sleeping Beauty from Philip's perspective. And not counting the prologue, which I also read, I've only read the first 2 chapters. So my experience so far, the prologue made some good signs of not at all following the lore of the Maleficent 2014 movie, or was it 2013? Was it the live action Maleficent movie, I forget when it came out. But then chapter 1 made me worried about this book. It made me worried that it was going to be what I was afraid Prince of Song and Sea was going to be back in the day. What I'm about to tell you happens in just the first chapter, so it's not really a spoiler. Philip has a squire, and the book tells you that she could easily beat Philip in a fight, and that's no good. Pro tips: if you want your audience to like a new character that you're introducing into a cast of pre-established characters, you can't get the audience to like the new character by having them upstage the characters that the audience already likes. That does not work. It just makes the audience wish that the new character wasn't there so that the characters they already like could be the ones to take care of business. And to make matters so much worse, there's these thieves that show up to kidnap someone, and Philip has to be talked into going after her by that squire. So in chapter 1, I was being told that my boy Philip needed to be talked into doing the heroic thing with resistance to the heroic thing, and I did not like that. Okay, I have a correction to make. It doesn't say she could easily beat him in a fight. It says she could easily take him in a fight, which, to be a lawyer for a second, the word take could mean that she could go toe-to-toe with him and put up a good fight, but that doesn't instantly mean that she would necessarily win. This could mean that she's like a worthy opponent, not that she outclasses him, maybe, if you want to interpret it like that. But in chapter 2, I sort of got clarification that Philip isn't where he should be or he's going to be as a character, and the reason there's so much dissonance between the Philip at the beginning of this book and the Philip we know from Sleeping Beauty is because he still has some character development to go through. So right now I'm thinking it's not too late for the situation to be salvaged, but it really needs to be salvaged. And not only do I need Philip to get some character development, I need him to get more powerful, because Philip's squire being able to easily take him in a fight will not stand. Also, in chapter 1, it says that he stole a dart, which that thievery is not an attribute that I want my hero Prince to have. But chapter 2 really hammered in that Prince Philip is not in a good way right now, and he is not in an acceptable state, and the book knows that, so hopefully this is just set up for character development. And I will say that even chapter 1 did portray Philip as having some redeeming qualities. For example, he intentionally throws a game of darts to make someone look good in front of her crush, so that was nice of him. Earlier on I said that chapter 1 made me worried that this book would be what I was worried Prince of Song and Sea would be, and what do I mean by that? Well, I thought that Prince of Song and Sea would be a case of tearing down the male character that we already like to make the female character look good. Going into Prince of Thorns and Nightmares, I thought that the writer had already proven that she was cool, and I didn't expect to be this worried. But it's not too late. I've only read the first 2 chapters, so there's plenty of time for Philip to be turned around. Like I said, I'll be reading A Twisted Tale Anthology story, and then I'll read some of Prince of Thorns and Nightmares, and then I'll make a video about that story, A Twisted Tale Anthology, which will include updates on Prince of Thorns and Nightmares. So I'll let you know how it's going as I go through it. But I don't think I'll be spoiling things in those videos. So remember to like, comment, subscribe, ring the bell, and be able to easily defeat your squire.